Good day to everybody. This is Pranav Rao from Smartkarma's research team. It is my pleasure to introduce Mitchell Kim, an independent research provider. Mitchell is a highly regarded TMT analyst with over 20 years experience. He was head of research for Hong Kong and China and head of internet and telecom research at Maybank Kim Eng in Hong Kong, where he made some of the highest return generating calls tracked by Bloomberg. At Morgan Stanley, Mitchell was co-head of the Asian telecom research team, ranked number one by Greenwich Survey for 7 years. Also a lot of work at Moon Capital in New York. Mitchell, thanks for joining us today, and over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope everybody could hear me clearly. And
Yes,
please
we
let me
can.
know if you can't. Okay, give me 1 second to share my screen so I could launch right into my presentation. All right, great. Thanks again. Thanks for having me this morning. And it's a great opportunity for me to share my insight on e-commerce stocks. First, let me say that e-commerce is roaring. And if there was any reluctance on the part of people who did not enjoy e-commerce, well, COVID certainly has forced them to, go to it, use e-commerce. It's not a choice anymore. It's almost become a necessity. And I tell you that we're not out of the woods at this point from COVID-19. We don't know when it will come back. If it does, I think more and more people will be relying on e-commerce to shop for their basic necessities. So COVID-19, unfortunately, it's been a good thing for e-commerce platform. Before I go further, allow me to say a quick disclaimer that I don't hold any of the stocks that I mentioned in this presentation. I recently did a report on looking at the tech sector in Asia, and I try to look at what happened to the tech sector performance-wise back in 2008 when global financial crisis hit. And I have to say that during the GFC, one thing that struck me was that Asia recovered faster than the U.S., which makes sense given that the global financial crisis was initiated in the U.S. I also noted that Asia internet services and game sector broadly recovered very quickly within 2-3 months, whereas I think for U.S. Some of the U.S. Stocks took almost 2 years to recover. And I think one lesson from there is that growth is still the king. I mean, if you have growth, you have a much better chance of rebounding quicker, and therefore, I think it makes sense to look at a lot of the tech stocks that I cover. I would also say I also note that top line growth of the internet service provider was very resilient during that time. Especially mobile games, online games like Tencent, NCSoft in Korea. I mean, they really were not impacted by a global financial crisis. And even this time around, I think that's quite similar as well. In that, people were forced to stay home and using their time. What do they do? Even my son, he's always playing games, although he could go outside, but we can't go outside. So I think that's certainly trend that we have seen and during the global financial crisis as well as currently. And in that report also, I did highlight e-commerce, online games, and search as an attractive kind of safe haven to kind of navigate through this COVID-19 crisis that we face. Now, I have to say, even before COVID, I have to say that the offline to online migration was already taking place. It was, but in fact, COVID, as I mentioned from the beginning, COVID just accelerated this offline to online migration. If you look at China, already almost 28% of retail consumption was taking place online, and that's almost like 10 percentage points from within like a year and a half. So that's happening rapidly. And of course, given that in China there's not as strong, the physical physical retail infrastructure, obviously it's even better for online shopping platforms. And we are also seeing that internet retail is continuing to grow rapidly, even though, I mean, the days of these internet platforms, the e-commerce platforms growing at doubling their revenues, those days are gone. But we're still seeing something close to about 20%, with the exception of obviously first quarter this year. And you could compare that with overall Chinese retail consumption, which is just around that 8%. So even if the retail consumption doesn't grow significantly, you see online e-commerce platforms growing because they're just taking the bigger piece of the pie. Now, given that, I mean, so what? So what about these e-commerce names? I wanted to talk about 4 names today. And if you look at on a year-to basis, Pinduoduo really stands out. It's one of the best performing stocks in Asia. It's giving you almost 70% return. And second best was JD at almost 55%. VIP Shop at one point, I think in April, it was up almost like 50%. So that was up a lot. But you may recall, if you did see my report, you may recall me taking a more cautious position on VIP Shop, just because I think some of the improvements that the company was doing in the right way, but it doesn't lend to more sustainable growth going forward. And if you look at something that is a little bit different, unusual, is Alibaba kind of underperforming. And that obviously has to do partly with dual listing, partly also with the fact that it is a bigger platform, and it's not going to have as a greater volatility on the upside on the recovery front as well. So that does make sense. But right now, at this given point in time, I favor Alibaba and JD.com. I prefer Alibaba just a bit more than JD.com, because JD has already performed, and its improvement is already well known at this point. The 4 charts that I want to share with you why I think Alibaba is attractive. Now, I focus a lot. I don't just focus on just valuation, say, hey, this is cheap or expensive. But what I learned over some 20 years of covering tech stocks, telecom stocks, and internet stocks is that operating metrics momentum is very important. And if you look at some of the drivers that I highlighted in some of my reports, JD.com report, as well as VIP Shop report, you could see what the drivers are and the components of the top line growth drivers. Well, first of all, Alibaba is the best, I think, consumption play in China. And if you look at Alibaba's GMV growth, if you to the left on the left chart there, I mean, not only is it still growing at some high 20% range, but it has reaccelerated. It has gone down in 2018, coming into 2019. Now, you can see that 2019, January to 2019 means basically calendar year 2018, and in calendar year 2018, that the growth, GMV growth, actually slowed down a bit, but in 2019 it had re-accelerated, and those are the type of operating metrics you want to see, and they lend well to better stock performance. Now, number 2. Now, this company is doing a great job at converting GMV, gross merchandise value, into revenues. Now, you could have all the GMV you want. If you can't monetize that, that's not gonna help the company. And you got to be profitable at some point, and that's not gonna happen if you cannot monetize it. And you can see that in 5-6 years ago, Alibaba was only monetizing only about 2 to 2.5% range. Now it's up at, based on my estimates, about 4, a little over 4, and I think it could go up to 6%. And and they're doing that because they're able to capitalize on advertising as well as transactions. Number three, Alibaba is a very profitable company, and what's driving that profitability is the core commerce uh, business line. Now, core commerce is, as I said, basically it's the e-commerce platform, core e-commerce platform, where all of the profits are generated for Alibaba. And right now, if I look at that business line, the core commerce, EBITA, which is similar to EBITDA without except for the depreciation, that remains strong. And I think that in 2000, FY21, that's March 2021, again, I think the growth this component will grow about 23, 24%. And it did, I think it's going to slump a little bit this year. And the company is reporting this coming Friday. And that's obviously that's because of the COVID effect. So otherwise, it would have been kind of right around 20% range. But I think that we're gonna see in FY21, you'll see this profitability improving even more. Not only that, if you think about Alibaba, I mean, there's that core commerce, but they have a whole bunch of other business lines, including cloud, including their videos and as well as other technology products. Now, those are all, however, those are all generating losses. But in a given time, those businesses lines will turn profitable or at least break even within the next 3-4 years. So all Alibaba has to do is minimize losses from these other businesses, and you will automatically see profit growth. And therefore, if you look at chart number 4, I'm expecting 45% 3-year CAGR growth on GAAP basis, operating profit growth. So that is a very exceptional growth of operating profit growth, I would say. Now, FY20 and 21 are my estimates. I do want to note that. Now, I wanted to share 4 charts why I like JD as well. JD is slightly different, and JD, I've been covering JD since end of 2015, and I can't say I was a pretty much of a big contrarian bear on JD, just because I think it's very hard for the company, given its operating business model, to generate significant margin that lends to more sustainable profitability. But I do see that the JD's finally. I was especially worried about it in 2019, but the company has turned the corner, and they're starting to see customers back in their ecosystem. And this has largely to do with their multi-pronged strategy, including doing some of the offline businesses, doing a lot of the FMCG products, fast-moving consumer good products, are starting to bring their customers into their ecosystem. And so I am quite pleased to see that happening again. So if you look at first quarter 2020, company just reported last Friday, they saw about 25% customer user growth. Now, what that happens is that is a key driver for JD right now, customer growth. And what happens is that has allowed the company to stabilize their quarterly growth. Now, in first quarter, despite COVID, I mean, they were still able to generate 21% revenue growth, which is quite outstanding, I might add. So when you have large revenue growth, what you want to make sure what you want to see is you want to see growth without having to sacrifice margins. And I think JD was able to accomplish that in first quarter. They broke through this 15% gross margin ceiling, and that's a tough ceiling for JD to break through at times, but they just cannot do it on a sustainable basis. But it does appear that to me that they've gotten to that point where they could reach a 15% gross margin. And what happens is that when you hit that gross margin, and reason they're able to hit this, and I don't have a slide here, but I did show it in my JD report from a week ago, that, in fact, a few days ago, that JD's revenue mix is improving for the better. Now, their gross merchandise ratio, proportion of the total product revenues has become like 40%. And reason why that's important is that general merchandise generate higher margins than electronics and appliances. Now, that's all the other groceries and offline stores that they're actually operating. So that is a quite a good set of margins that they recorded. So what then happens is, oops, sorry about that, it leads to exceptional profit growth. I am expecting about almost 50% growth per year for next couple of years for JD as well. Now keep in mind, I mean, the JD has a very thin margin, so growing 50% is still, that doesn't, it doesn't make a significant profits per se, but in terms of, if you look at its value, if you investors looking at valuations on PE basis, it's trading at something like 70, 80 times. Now that's going to cut it to half, and 40 times, and probably more reasonable internet multiple, like around 30 times. So it's certainly, I think that is a progress to see. Now, if the stock, I mean, Pinduoduo, I mean, it's been on fire. I mean, basically, shareholders are loving it, investors are loving it, and that's precisely because they're focused on growth, and the company is growing, faster than anybody else out there. So you got to give them credit for that. My only concern is the company is growing because they're spending money, and basically they spend like almost 85-90% of their revenues on marketing. That's subsidies as well as running programs, group buying programs, and whatnot. And but still, that if you're going to spend that much money, you want to see it in terms of revenue generation. So what I did actually was look at what is it revenue or gross profit per buyer, compare across the board with Alibaba, JD, and VIP Shop as well. And the reason why I use gross profit for VIP Shop and JD is that it would be unfair to use revenues. They are more of a direct seller, whereas Pinduoduo and Alibaba are more a marketplace platform. So if you actually look at gross profit per buyer for those two versus Alibaba and Pinduoduo, you could see that Alibaba is doing, is one of the most efficient in terms of getting the bang for the buck from their buyers. Now, I took a look at another way of looking at it is looking at their marketing spending, since Pinduoduo is spending significant portion of its revenues, almost all of its revenues on marketing, and to see what kind of revenue on a per marketing dollar basis. Basically, Pinduoduo is generating, it's beyond, but I think it's more fun when you show it in the chart. It's much more evident when you see a chart like this. Pinduoduo is where every dollar it spends, it generates dollar in revenues. But if you look at Alibaba, every dollar it spends on marketing, Alibaba generates almost like, well, in this case, RMB, right? So it's generating like 9.5 RMB per 1 RMB. Now, VIP Shop is generating more than JD.com, and that's because they have made progress. But VIP Shop, I'm more concerned just because the company has done well. Reason why the stock has come back from trading in sub $10 range to it hit like $18 a couple of months back, and that's really because two things that the company is doing well, and that's one of the things that I've been advising, sharing my thoughts with the management before in the last couple of years, is that they were trying to be all things for all people and focusing on cosmetics and lower margin business. And two things I told them that don't try to make this logistics into a separate business, trying to get a valuation for it, and focus on apparel. And and the company is doing that. Now they are something close to 70% of their business is now focused on apparel, and and they have basically outsourced the fulfillment, especially the delivery part of it to third parties. So that's helping them in terms of their fulfillment costs as a revenue ratio, and that's why their operating margin has returned to like 5%, close to 5% range from its lowest at around 2%. But still, but I think the concern about VIP Shop is done well, but does it have enough to continue to generate a sustainable profit and top line growth once the benefits wear out in the next few quarters? In terms of valuation, it's very difficult to make a valuation argument on some of these internet stocks, just because they are kind of all over and they don't generate a lot of profit. So, probably with the exception of Alibaba and Tencent, not many of them generate significant profit. Oh, Baidu as well, so another way of looking at it is price to sales, but it's very difficult to get price to sales because it's like comparing apples and oranges. Alibaba is a pure platform company, so it only generates like 5% of the GMV as its revenue, whereas a company like JD, 90% of its business comes from direct sales. So obviously direct sales, it's like the revenue is going to be much higher. That's why I tend to look at gross margin or rather gross profit rather than the total revenue when I try to compare the two. So it looks like platform players will always look more expensive on a price to sales basis, like Pinduoduo and Alibaba. Then if you compare that with somebody like JD or VIP, JD and VIP are at sub 1 time. So that so you cannot make that similar kind of comparison. So if you look at actually TJ Maxx of the US, if you all the way on the bottom of that price to sales, it's trading at about 1.5 times. And of course, there's that TJ Maxx premium. But so price to sales will be very cheap for more of a direct sales online retailers than it is for platform players. Now, so I did want to just quickly show that if you look at one thing, I do have a bunch of appendix here on comparing key metrics of the Alibaba and JD and Pinduoduo and VIP. But I think the key metrics that I did share was those 2 charts that I shared with you. So I think certainly at this point, while Pinduoduo has done well, I would be very cautious about both Pinduoduo as well as VIP Shop. I am much more of constructive on Alibaba and JD.com. So I think I'll start with any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Mitchell. We've got 6 minutes, so we've got a few questions come through. So let me put them your way. The first question is regarding these e-commerce ecosystems, effectively, or conglomerates, as the term was used sometime back as part of Insight 2020. What bits or pieces of this ecosystem do you think are still missing from the likes of Alibaba and say potentially JD?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Alibaba or like Tencent, they're all gunning for the same thing. They want to be it's all about traffic. It's all about mind share and engagement. So they truly, they want to create this ecosystem. And as some people have called it like conglomerate of sort. Yeah, indeed it is. For Alibaba, they're going to crash at some point, right? And they've been heading that course. Obviously, Alibaba and Tencent have been competing on, especially on the finance part, right? So Alibaba has Alipay, there's Tencent has Tenpay, so they're already doing that. What Alibaba doesn't really have is online games, but and Alibaba has been dabbling in games as well. But I don't think that their expertise is that. So I think it'll take a long time before Alibaba actually makes an investment or venture into online games. But I think what could change this is basically advent of virtual reality, augmented reality that may give Alibaba a chance to actually get into games, basically leapfrogging it. So that's probably the only chance. Otherwise, just Tencent with this WeChat, it's too powerful to try to break into. Because if you look at Tencent, it's not just about it's just publishing its games, licensed games and whatnot. It's about its WeChat platform that just brings everybody together. And of course for Tencent, I think Tencent is always been trying to get into e-commerce, but Tencent, they know their limitations. So he knows his limitations. He doesn't try to get into it. They did dabble into it back in 2014, but they shelved the e-commerce platform when they invested in JD.com, and of course they had invested in VIP Shop as well. So I think more and more. I think it's next thing's going to be in the area of high tech. So we don't really know how virtual reality, augmented reality will interface and change the way we look at different businesses. But certainly, I think that's one area where I think you're going to see convergence of the big titans, Tencent and Alibaba.
Understood. And I think that kind of plays into the entire online to offline theme that Alibaba has been investing in. Definitely helps there. One last question, if I can just squeeze this in. I think we've heard the bull thesis on Chinese e-commerce and growth and increasing penetration. If you had to list out one key issue or risk to this business, apart from, say, valuations into investing, what might that be?
Well, I think it's always the big concern for Chinese e-commerce players is competition, right? Look, Amazon and Alibaba at one point were pretty close to each other in terms of market value, at around 400 billion. And then after that, Amazon just took out. Why is that? Because Amazon really doesn't have competition, but Alibaba still has to contend with JD.com and other new verticals leaping in, like Pinduoduo as well, which means that they have to subsidize a lot more, and they do, and they have to get better. They have to invest in logistics. So I think that's if you look at Alibaba's core business, that is awesome business. They generate like almost 80% margin, but it's the other ones that they're forced to invest in. They have to do that because that's how you're going to contain your traffic and grow your traffic. So that's that. I think competition is going to be key.
Got it. Thank you so much for that insightful presentation, Mitchell, and taking those questions. I think we're coming up on time, so I'd like to thank you again for participating in Insight 2020. And we will be beginning our next session shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.